All right, AP Psychology. This is the last video on our unit of cognition. So far we've talked about memory, we've talked about thinking and problem solving, and now we are going to do the last piece, and that's language, and how language and our acquisition and development of language will impact our thinking. So let's first define language. And what it comes down to, language can be a spoken, written, or signed word. And it's the way that we combine these to communicate meaning. So it's not just what comes out of your mouth. Okay? Language is our ability to communicate meaning in some way, shape, or form. So a couple interesting questions for you to think about as we get started on our discussion of language. So if we are looking at language in connection to thinking, if you can't talk and you can't communicate meaning, are you thinking? If a baby who is not producing words is a baby thinking, and the words that come out of a baby's mouth, they're not really words that we would consider to be intelligible vocabulary. So are the sounds and the cries that a baby makes, are those words? Something to think about. I think it's always interesting. I think babies are very good at communicating their wants and needs. And it's interesting how we as parents and caregivers can adapt, and we learn to actually understand what all of those sounds really mean. So there definitely is some cognition, some thinking going on with all of those sounds that are not pinned down to being exact words. So one of the things to consider with the study of language is the fact that language affects how we think about the world. When you look at other cultures and you look at other places of the world, the vocabulary, it's not an absolute transfer from one language to another in terms of the words that we use to describe certain places and events and emotions. And so from that, what we know and what research has shown us, the research of Benjamin Whorf, is that certain cultures maybe prize certain emotions and characteristics, and they may have a large number of words to describe certain things in their culture, in their society, that are valued or not. And that's what we would label and what we would call linguistic relativity, that language can affect how we think about the world. So when we look at language, we need to look at the different elements of language. And these words are probably new terms to you, and to make it easier for you, I've tried to interject some mnemonics for you to help you remember the different elements of language. So the first element is what we call a phoneme, And a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that makes a difference to the meaning of a word, a phoneme. So if you think of a phone makes a sound when it rings. A phone makes a sound. And a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that has meaning. And it's not going to correlate with the alphabet. There are, 26 letters in the alphabet? So we have more than 26 phonemes, because you have to remember that you can pair together letters to actually make sounds that create meaning. And so in the English language, we have 44 different phonemes. And so the letter B, which makes the sound of B, is a phoneme, B. And PH, when you combine the letters P and H, that's the sound of F. But F is also represented by the letter F. So it's a sound that makes a difference to the meaning of the word. So if you look at the word chat and you have to break it down by each of the sounds that provide meaning to the word. So if you look at the word chat, there are actually 3 phonemes. Ch, a, t, ch, a, t, 3. So there are 3 phonemes in the word chat. A morpheme, on the other hand, is the smallest unit of meaningful sound. Let's look at phoneme, the smallest unit of sound that makes a difference to the meaning of a word. Morpheme is the smallest unit of meaningful sound. So if we look at the unit of the letters P-R-E, pre, and that means before. It can also mean a or the. And if we add an S to a word, then it becomes a plural. And so now that unit actually has meaning. If you add ed, the combination of letters, it adds meaning because it now means past tense. So if we look at the word cats, C-A-T-S, there are 2 morphemes. So the first unit is going to be C-A-T. We know that as a cat, but there's an S on it, cat, it's plural, more than one. So there's 2 morphemes in the word cats, whereas dog, all by itself, is just 1 morpheme. So let's try this and think about the number of phonemes that are in the word dog. D, A, G. There's 3 phonemes in the word dog. Cats, K, A, T, S. There's 4 phonemes in the word cats. So let's keep going. You can look at some examples here and you can try and see if you want to pause the video and work yourself through these morphemes. And as you do that, see if you can also test yourself on how many phonemes there are in these words as well. So next we're going to learn about language structure. When we look at language structure, there's 3 major components. The first is what we call syntax. And syntax has to do with the sentence structure or the word order. So syntax, sentence structure. So if the statement Chatty is 4th class period my, that doesn't make a lot of sense to us in the English language. The syntax is incorrect, the sentence structure or the word order. It would be more appropriate if I said my 5th period class is chatty. That would make more sense. The word semantics, when we look at language, has to do with the meaning of a word. So in the English language, we have words that sound the same, but they don't always mean the same thing. So the semantics refer to the meaning of the word. And then grammar, we know, is a system of rules that incorporates the syntax and the semantics. And sometimes we have to look at the meaning of a word. Can I see your homework, please? And then you look at the responses. And if you consider syntax and semantics, it's possible that there could be more than one possible answers to that question. So another play on syntax, semantics. The first statement, child's stool, great for the garden. So what are we looking at in terms of semantics there? Stool could mean a couple of different things. California judge to rule on a nude beach. Oh my. Well, is he going to produce his rulings on a nude beach? Or is he going to make a decision about nude beaches? The next statement, eye drops off shelf. I don't know if that really actually means physically that an eye drops off the shelf, or are the eye drops off the shelf for some reason at your local CVS? We don't know. So again, this all goes back to syntax and semantics in grammar. So we're going to finish up our look at language, and we need to pay attention to the development of language, our acquisition and the processing of language. So we got to talk about babies for a little bit here. And something that's really fascinating is just how drastic our acquisition is of language from the very first year of life to, say, your 5th year of life, when most kids are starting kindergarten. So at the age of 1, a child basically has about a 10-word vocabulary. It's kind of survival mode. They may say some sounds that sound like words, but in terms of really clearly being able to utilize vocabulary in a meaningful way, it comes down to about 10 words. At the age of 5, however, a child has a 10,000 word vocabulary. It's like there's a sponge just soaking up words, and all they want to do is use their words. If you've ever had a conversation with a 4 or 5-year-old, they just want to talk. They have all these words that they want to share with you and use and communicate. So we need to go through the stages of language acquisition. And again, there's a few little mnemonics that might help you differentiate these stages. So if you think about a baby, and a baby that's about 2 months old, the sounds that come out of their mouth, those sounds are what we call cooing, the cooing stage. And they're really just vowel sounds. And part of that is because their mouth muscles aren't developed enough. They're not strong enough to make the consonant sounds. Duh, duh. That takes a little work. So it's just much easier to just let the air flow through the mouth and create these little vowel sounds. Ah, ooh, oh, ah, ooh. Right? So that's what we call cooing. And then they get a little bit older, and other aspects of their life are getting more developed, and so is language. And language, they're getting a little bit stronger, and they're getting more adept at communicating, and they kind of start babbling. And the sounds, it kind of feels good coming out of their mouth, but it really doesn't have a lot of meaning. And what this is called is babbling. And they might add a consonant now to some of that cooing, the ba 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 da 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 ma 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 ma. And the question that you need to ask, and this is a good one to ask your parents, did you, when you were learning to talk, did you say mama or dada first? And just try for a second and make the sound and then make the sound d, d, d. And try to be as relaxed as possible. And as much as your mom wants you to say her name first, mama, it's actually easier for a baby to say the D first. So it's usually dada that gets said first. Sorry, Mom. I know, I had to live through it too. The next phase is the one-word stage, and that happens at about 1 year. And at 1 year, they're just going to use a one-word vocabulary. Cup, bottle, milk, dog. Again, it's about a 10-word vocabulary, but they are communicating in one-word phrases at about 1 year of age. And then they get a little older at about 2 years, the toddler stage, and this is called the 2-word or the telegraphic stage. And they begin to combine words. They're actually making sentences. but the syntax and the grammar might not be quite correct. Anne hitted me. Well, we know that in the English language that's probably not grammatically correct, but they are communicating, and it's a form of vocabulary and it's language that most could understand what they are saying. And then from here, we hit rapid development, and our vocabulary and our language continues to develop throughout most of our lifespan, into adulthood, actually. So an interesting caveat to all of this is the fact that babies who cannot hear, deaf babies, actually do babble. They just babble slightly later than babies who can hear. And they're able to babble these sounds. There are sounds that come out of their mouth they've never heard before. And the interesting thing about thinking and learning language is that deaf babies know how to babble with their hands if they are taught sign language. At a very, very young age, they can make sounds with their hands that allow them to communicate. So finally, a last little thought about language is that all babies can distinguish between all possible human sounds. But as the baby grows up in the house where they are only hearing one language, they lose the ability to listen to sounds that are not of their language. So we become a monolingual person. However, if we grow up in a house where there are two languages being spoken, it actually becomes possible for our brain to learn another language much easier than it is if there is only one language spoken in the home. So I think this is an interesting question for curriculum development. And why is it that language classes don't show up until you're in high school? Doesn't this go against what research is telling us? That it might explain why some of you maybe struggled so much in the first level of language, Spanish 1, ASL 1, French 1. It's a hard class because your brain is really learning language from scratch, as opposed to if you had this in, say, first grade, second grade, when it was still relatively fresh. So a question to ponder. And so there you go. You have completed your videos and all your content for your unit on cognition. Great job, AP Psychology.